It's been a busy few weeks for Clare, so we certainly appreciate her participation this morning. And the question that I'm posing to Clare is the role of the ESB in providing whole-of-system oversight. Thanks, Clare.
Thanks, Cassandra. I've been living, breathing and sleeping on the guarantee over the National Energy Guarantee over the last couple of months. So I'm trying to shake that out of my head and talk about something a little bit more broadly this morning. But I will, of course, touch on the guarantee because it would be remiss of me not to in a consultation period. The Energy Security Board was formed as one of the recommendations of the Finkel Review. I don't know if we all remember that. It was only a year ago. But the Finkel Review had 50 recommendations in it. So the board's mandate is very much about implementing that review, so the recommendations within it, and also having whole-of-system oversight. So whole-of-system from a system security, reliability, and making sure it's in the interests of consumers, so therefore affordability perspective. If I stand back a little bit and think about what are we doing and what have we done, we came together last year. We put out the Health of the NEM report just before Christmas. In that report, we went through and we looked at what we expected the energy system to deliver. And we really did sort of take a bit of a different approach with that report. So there's lots of well-researched reports out there by the AMC or the AER or AEMO. Not to say ours wasn't well-researched, but we took more of a sort of a conversational tone in it. And the five of us reflected on what do we actually think the health of the NEM is right now? Is it healthy? Is it in critical condition? Is it are we keeping an eye on it? Are we monitoring it, taking its pulse every day? And what we felt was that in some things it is healthy, on some things it is in critical condition, and in some things we're kind of keeping a bit of a watching brief. But on things like system security, reliability and affordability, we do have concerns about how we are going to deliver for customers, for not just now, but into the future. So that was kind of for us anyway, it was a really good opportunity to sort of talk and reflect upon where we think we're going with this market. And there's something else we had to do as part of Finkel, which is a strategic energy plan. So one of the recommendations was that there be a strategic energy plan developed, I think it was by the middle of this year. So we've been working with COAG Energy Council on what that might look like. Because there's lots in Finkel. All of it's important. All of it appeals to different people. There's, chapters on security, chapters on reliability, chapters on affordability, chapters on governance, and all of it plays its part in how we deliver a more affordable, reliable and secure energy system that's in track with our international emissions obligations. But there are bits for me, so this is just my perspective, but there are bits for me that sort of jump out and say, actually we need to sort of see that in a more strategic context. And they're the things that influence investment and risk, in my view, because if you do want a more reliable system, if you do want a system that's capable of seeing an active demand management or demand response, and you do want to see a system that's least cost, you actually need to think about the trade-offs that sit there between investment and risk. And so there are probably 7 or 8 things that I kind of in my head group together as being really important in thinking about how do we drive new investment, because ultimately new investment, unless it's demand response, new investment, both of those things together are what helps us to keep the lights on. And doing it in the lowest possible cost way is how we make energy more affordable. So the things I think that kind of affect investment will be the guarantee, which, originally in Finkel they talked about a generator reliability obligation and a clean energy target. And our view, when asked by the Minister, the Federal Minister, was that the guarantee may be a better way of achieving that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the guarantee, a demand response mechanism, strategic reserve and day-ahead markets in a wholesale market design context. They're the things we need to consider in terms of those trade-offs between how we get new investment and who bears the risk of those new investments. And why I say that is, the NEM has been historically about market participants bearing risk. And that's been a really good feature of it. It's meant that we have been able to drive down oversupply, get the cheapest possible power along the way. When we start to talk about, and you referred to it, Cassandra, in your introduction, whether or not the market will deliver, the opposite of the market delivering is someone else deciding other than the market. And when somebody else decides, that's customers who bears that risk. So that transfer of risk between market participants and customers is something that as the Energy Security Board we've got to be very conscious of and ensure that if we're doing it for the right reasons. On the network side, I think there are some similar issues. So when you think about the integrated system plans, so the ISP, the renewable energy zones, the priority projects that may emerge from that, and the role of the RIT, so the regulated investment decision basically for transmission and distribution. Those things will shape that same trade-off in the network space. So, will we see how do we get new investment and who bears the risk of that new investment? So I sort of think about those 8 things together. And as I said, we're still working through the strategic energy plan, but I would expect to see some fairly strong themes around those 8 kind of buckets of work emerge as we work through that. In terms of, I guess, how are we seeing reliability particularly and affordability, the guarantee is a really big part of that from our perspective. So when you think about what's prevented potentially efficient new investment in capacity over the last decade, I've spent the better part of 15 years yelling, sort of shouting, pleading, crying. The integration of energy and climate change policy is something that we've just been unable to achieve. And it's continued to plague us as a policy issue. And it has meant that the investments that you would hope to see flowing and without risk, or without that kind of risk, policy risk, have actually been a bit hesitant or have been happening in other ways. So from my perspective, being able to integrate energy and climate change policy is the number one benefit of the National Energy Guarantee. The other bit, so I guess what is it? What is the National Energy Guarantee? It is a mechanism which we are hoping, or which we're consulting on at the moment, which would be aiming to put an obligation on retailers and some market customers to ensure they have sufficient investment in dispatchable megawatts or demand response to meet their share of peak demand. Now, when I say investment in megawatts, it doesn't mean you have to actually own your generator and bring it along and show it to us. I'm talking about contracting as being a proxy for that investment. It's also designed to ensure that the electricity sector delivers its emissions reduction targets. So they're the 2 things that retailers and customers will be asked to do in their contracting. Reliability, so making sure you've got enough megawatts for your share of peak demand, and making sure that you've got emissions, that basically the basket of contracts you have is in step or in line with the average emissions level for the system. Bringing those 2 things together, as I said, like we've sort of been on a path like this with energy and climate change policy. So the RET was great at building new renewables, and I think that's what over the coming years we'll see wholesale prices reducing because we've got a lot of investment coming through that pipeline. But that investment's been happening outside the energy market without any sort of reference back to what's happening in the wholesale spot market. Okay, yep, sorry. And so from that perspective, our concern is that we're not seeing that the needs of the power system are being dealt with from that respect. And we're getting a lot of out-of-market interventions by AEMO, which ultimately are quite expensive for customers. So the guarantee is designed to bring those things back together. And our view is that by giving confidence over the future emissions reduction trajectory, we'll actually reduce the risk premium on new investments and improve affordability. And the other thing is, by increasing contracting in the market, we'll reduce the volatility and high prices we've seen in the spot market. So they're the 2 kind of drivers for affordability that we see from the guarantee, as well as the other benefits, obviously, of delivering a more reliable and lower emissions power system. Just quickly before I finish, the one thing I just wanted to cover is what it isn't. So, I think when I was away overseas for a few months last year, so conspicuously absent when the guarantee was actually announced, but lots of people had different views of what it meant, because obviously the media reports it as keeping the lights on, and for all of us energy nerds, we know that's not just about reliability, but it's also about system security. It would be very difficult to try and deliver system security through the guarantee. The guarantee is about megawatts in a region at a point in time for a given duration, and that's about as much as a contract can take and still be a deeply liquid traded instrument. So system security is actually much more about particular locations, megavars, megawatt hour seconds, and they're not the types of things you can put into a contract without making it very bespoke. So our view is there are other things that need to be done. AEMO still needs to keep the power system operating. It needs flexibility in that. It needs to be able to co-optimise resources. And so the other pieces of work that came out of Finkel that we see work hand in glove with the guarantee is demand response, because that's obviously going to be the cheapest way to deliver actually our P10 level of megawatts, so the amount of capacity we need to deliver energy on a 1 in 10 year event. You don't want to build assets to deliver all of that, so demand response is going to be a huge part of that. A day-ahead market, we're considering that from a how do you co-optimise resources perspective and deliver operational flexibility. And then the strategic reserve. So you don't want an obligation on retailers to deliver megawatts that AEMO is also delivering. So we need to make sure that from a least cost perspective, those two things, one picks up where the other one leaves off. So given I got belled, I will leave it there. All I could say to you though is, the consultation's open, submissions are due on the 8th of March. We've deliberately made it a very open paper because we really, really want to hear from people. So this is not a situation where we have all the answers and we're telling you and just sort of politely asking for feedback. We actually genuinely want your input, so get active and tell us what you think. Thanks.